Hello Jerry, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Hello Joanna, I'm doing great. What about you?
I am doing well, thank you for asking. Let us get started with the interview. Can you please tell me about your experience in developing web applications with PHP?
Sure. I have been working with PHP for over 5 years now. I've developed various web applications, including content management systems, e-commerce platforms, and social networking sites. I have also worked with different PHP frameworks such as Laravel and Symfony.
That sounds great. Can you explain what PHP is and what are the most important characteristics of this programming language?
PHP is a free and open-source server-side programming language used for developing dynamic web applications. It is easy to learn and use and has extensive documentation and a large community of developers. PHP is compatible with a wide variety of web servers and databases, making it very flexible. It is an interpreted language, which means it does not require prior compilation and code executes on the web server. PHP supports different programming paradigms such as object-oriented programming, OOP, and structured programming, among others.
Thanks for explaining that. How would you describe your experience in using relational databases in web applications with PHP?
I have extensive experience working with relational databases like MySQL and PostgreSQL in PHP web applications. I've designed and implemented database schemas, written complex queries, and optimized database performance. I've also used object relational mapping, ORM, libraries like Eloquent and Laravel for easier and more efficient database operations.
Impressive. Can you explain what object-oriented programming, OOP, is, and how you would apply it in developing a web application with PHP?
Object-oriented programming, OOP, is a programming paradigm that uses objects and classes to represent real-world entities and their interactions. In PHP, I apply OOP principles by creating classes to represent different entities and their properties and methods. This helps in organizing the code, making it more modular, reusable, and maintainable.
What is a class in PHP? How would you define a class and its properties?
A class in PHP is a blueprint for creating objects. It defines the properties and methods that an object of that class should have. You can define a class using the class keyword, followed by the class name and a pair of curly braces that enclose the class's properties and methods. Properties are variables that hold the state of an object, while methods are functions that perform actions or operations on the object.
How do you handle errors and exceptions in the PHP code that you develop?
I handle errors and exceptions in PHP using try-catch blocks. I wrap the code that might throw an exception in a try block, and then catch the exception using a catch block. This allows me to handle the exception gracefully and provide appropriate error messages to the user, as well as log the errors for debugging purposes. I also make use of error reporting settings and custom error handlers to deal with different types of errors in the application.
What is MVC? How would you implement this design pattern in a web application with PHP?
MVC stands for Model View Controller. It is a design pattern that separates the application logic into 3 interconnected components. The model represents the application's data and business logic, the view handles the presentation and display of the data, and the controller manages user input and updates the model and view accordingly. To implement MVC in a PHP web application, I usually use a PHP framework like Laravel, which has a built-in MVC architecture. This allows me to organize my code in a modular and maintainable way.
How do you ensure that a web application with PHP is secure and protected against malicious attacks?
I follow best practices and guidelines to ensure the security of PHP web applications. Some of the steps I take include input validation and sanitization to prevent SQL injection and cross-site scripting, XSS, attacks, using prepared statements for database queries, storing passwords securely using hashing algorithms like bcrypt, implementing proper access controls and session management, and keeping the PHP version and third-party libraries up to date to avoid known vulnerabilities. I also make use of security features provided by PHP frameworks, like CSRF protection in Laravel.
What are the main differences between PHP 5 and PHP 7?
7 Philippine pesos introduced several improvements and new features compared to 5 Philippine pesos. Some of the main differences include significant performance improvements, reduced memory usage, the introduction of scalar type declarations and return type declarations, the null coalescing operator, and the spaceship operator, equals. 7 Philippine pesos also deprecated some features and functions from 5 Philippine pesos and removed some previously deprecated functionalities.
How do you handle the scalability of a web application with PHP?
To handle the scalability of a PHP web application, I follow best practices for performance optimization, such as using efficient algorithms and data structures, implementing caching strategies, minimizing the use of blocking operations, and optimizing database queries. Additionally, I use horizontal scaling techniques like load balancing and clustering to distribute the workload across multiple servers. I also make use of cloud-based platforms and services, such as AWS, to take advantage of their auto-scaling capabilities.
What are PHP frameworks? What is your experience in using PHP frameworks?
PHP frameworks are pre-built libraries and tools that provide a structured and organized way of developing web applications in PHP. They follow best practices and design patterns, making the development process more efficient and maintainable. Some popular PHP frameworks include Laravel, Symfony, CodeIgniter, and Yi. My experience with PHP frameworks mainly involves Laravel and Symfony. I've used Laravel for building various web applications, including content management systems and e-commerce platforms. I have also worked with Symfony for some complex web application projects. These frameworks have helped me streamline the development process, follow best practices, and write clean, maintainable code.
How do you work with HTTP requests and responses in a web application with PHP?
In a PHP web application, I work with HTTP requests and responses using the built-in global variables and functions provided by PHP, such as $_get, $_post, $_request, and $_server for handling input data from the client, and header, and set cookie functions for modifying the HTTP response. When using a PHP framework like Laravel, I use the framework's built-in request and response objects, which provide a more convenient and object-oriented way of handling HTTP requests and responses, including accessing input data, setting headers, and managing cookies and sessions.
What is your experience in using version control tools such as Git for the development of web applications with PHP?
I have been using Git for version control throughout my entire PHP development career. Git helps me keep track of code changes, collaborate with other developers, and manage different branches of the codebase for features and bug fixes. I'm familiar with common Git commands like commit, push, pull, merge, and rebase, and I have experience using Git-based platforms like GitHub and GitLab for code hosting and collaboration.
How would you describe your experience in implementing continuous integration and continuous delivery in the development of web applications with PHP?
I have experience setting up and using continuous integration, C, and continuous delivery, CD, pipelines for PHP web applications, mainly using tools like Jenkins, Travis C, and GitLab CD. These pipelines automate the process of building, testing, and deploying the application, ensuring that the code is always in a releasable state and allowing for faster and more reliable delivery of new features and bug fixes. I've also worked with containerization tools like Docker to create reproducible and portable development and deployment environments.
How would you describe your experience in implementing unit tests in the development of web applications with PHP?
I have experience writing unit tests for PHP web applications using testing frameworks like PHP Unit. Writing unit tests helps ensure the correctness and reliability of the code, making it easier to refactor and extend the application without introducing bugs. I follow test-driven development (TDD) principles, writing tests before implementing the actual code, and I also make use of code coverage tools to ensure that the tests cover a sufficient percentage of the codebase.
How do you handle application caching in a web application with PHP?
In a PHP web application, I implement caching strategies to improve performance and reduce server load. This can include caching the output of resource-intensive operations, storing the results of database queries, or caching entire pages or page fragments. I use various caching mechanisms like APCU, Memcached, or Redis, depending on the requirements of the project. When using a PHP framework like Laravel, I leverage the built-in caching features provided by the framework, which simplifies the process of implementing and managing caching in the application.
How do you work with the PHP API to interact with other web applications or services?
When working with APIs in PHP, I use the built-in curl library or tools like Guzzle, an HTTP client library, to make HTTP requests to external web services or APIs. I also handle the processing of API responses, typically in JSON or XML format, by parsing the data and using it within the application as needed. In addition, I have experience in building and consuming RESTful APIs, following best practices for API design and authentication, such as using OAuth or token-based authentication.
How do you work with sessions and cookies in a web application with PHP?
In a PHP web application, I use sessions and cookies to manage user data and maintain state across multiple page requests. I work with PHP's built-in session management functions, such as session_start, $_session, and session_destroy, to create, access, and destroy session data. For cookies, I use PHP's setCookie function to create and modify cookies and access them using the $_cookie global variable. When using a PHP framework like Laravel, I use the framework's built-in session and cookie management features, which provide a more convenient and secure way of handling sessions and cookies.
How do you handle the internationalization of the web application with PHP?
To handle the internationalization of a PHP web application, I use localization techniques, such as storing and managing translated content in separate language files, and using PHP's built-in getText functions or third-party libraries like Symfony's translation component to display the appropriate translations based on the user's language preference. I also ensure that the application supports different character sets and date formats, and follows best practices for handling text direction, numbers, and other language-specific features.
How would you describe your experience in optimizing the performance of a web application with PHP?
I have experience optimizing the performance of PHP web applications by identifying and addressing performance bottlenecks, both on the server side and client side. Some of the techniques I use include code profiling and optimization, efficient use of caching mechanisms, optimizing database queries, and minimizing the use of blocking operations. On the client side, I focus on optimizing the loading of assets like images, CSS, and JavaScript, using techniques like minification, compression, and lazy loading. I also utilize performance monitoring tools like New Relic to continuously monitor the application's performance and identify areas for improvement.
Thank you for answering all these questions, Jerry. I appreciate your time and the insights you've provided. We will be in touch with you soon regarding the next steps in the hiring process.
Thank you, Joanna, for this opportunity. I enjoyed discussing my experience and knowledge with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing back from you soon. If you have any more questions or need any additional information, please don't hesitate to contact me.
Thank you, Jerry. We will definitely reach out if we need more information or have any further questions. Have a great day.
You too, Joanna. Take care and have a great day.